when you stop trying to become someone. At some point, without warning, you may feel tired. Not physically tired, but tired of trying, tired of becoming, tired of fixing yourself, tired of believing that who you are right now is only a stepping stone to someone better. This isn't failure. It's not giving up. It's something far more honest. This is the moment when the endless project of you begins to loosen its grip, and something quieter, deeper, and more real finally has space to speak. There comes a moment quiet, almost unnoticeable, when you grow tired of becoming, tired of self-improvement plans, tired of chasing the next version of yourself, tired of believing that who you are now is merely a draft, something provisional, something waiting to be fixed. It's not a dramatic collapse. There's no crisis announcement, just a subtle exhaustion that settles in and asks a simple question. What if there's nothing wrong with me? Most of our lives are spent in preparation mode, preparing to be happier, preparing to be confident, preparing to be worthy. We tell ourselves, once I achieve this, then I'll relax. Once I heal that, then I'll live. Once I become someone better, then I'll allow myself to feel at home. But notice what this does. Life becomes a hallway, and the door we're waiting for is always one step ahead. Even joy gets postponed. Even peace becomes conditional. And yet, every so often, something cracks. Not because you failed, but because you finally notice the cost of endless becoming. You notice how every version of better you still feels incomplete. How every milestone brings relief, but only briefly. How the finish line keeps moving, quietly, without apology. And that's when a strange realization begins to surface. Maybe the problem was never that you weren't enough. Maybe the problem was believing that you had to become enough. From the moment we learn to speak, we learn to compare, to measure, to rank ourselves against invisible standards. Be more productive. Be more attractive. Be more spiritual. Be more successful. Be more healed. Even awakening gets turned into a project, another mountain to climb, another identity to perform. But there's a point where the soul grows weary of improvement. Not lazy, not resigned, just honest. It begins to sense that the endless effort to become someone is quietly rooted in a deeper belief that who you are right now is not acceptable. And that belief, once seen clearly, starts to dissolve. You begin to notice something almost shocking. You have been present for your entire life, through every failure, every success, every version of yourself you now judge or romanticize. The awareness that noticed all of it that hasn't changed. It was there when you were confused. It was there when you were confident. It was there before you knew who you were supposed to be. So who exactly is the one that needs fixing? This is where the struggle softens. You don't stop growing. You don't stop learning. But growth no longer comes from self-rejection. It comes from curiosity. You stop asking, how do I become someone else? And start asking, what happens if I fully inhabit who I already am? And that changes everything. You begin to listen instead of forcing, to respond instead of striving, to move when there's movement and rest when there isn't. You discover that peace doesn't arrive when the project is complete. Peace arrives when the project is dropped. And this can feel unsettling, because so much of your identity was built around becoming, your ambition, your discipline, your story of overcoming. Without the struggle, who are you? At first, there's emptiness, a kind of spacious uncertainty. But then you realize this emptiness isn't lack, it's openness. It's the space where life can finally meet you without resistance. You start to notice how often you were living for an imagined future self, enduring the present as a means to an end. Now, the present stops being a waiting room. It becomes the place where life actually happens. You drink water and actually taste it. You listen without rehearsing responses. You walk without mentally arriving somewhere else. Nothing extraordinary, and yet, everything feels more real. You also become gentler with others. When you stop trying to become someone, You stop demanding that others be different too. You stop seeing people as projects. Stop measuring relationships by their usefulness to your growth narrative. You allow people to be unfinished, messy, contradictory, just like you. And something remarkable happens. Without effort, authenticity deepens. Not the loud, performative kind, but the quiet kind that doesn't need to announce itself. You speak when there's something to say. You're silent when there isn't. You stop curating every interaction, and some people drift away. Not because you changed dramatically, but because you stopped trying, stopped compensating, stopped proving, stopped polishing. And that's okay, because what remains is simpler, steadier, truer. You also begin to relate differently to pain. Pain no longer means you're failing the assignment. It no longer signals that you're doing life wrong. Pain becomes information, a movement, something passing through awareness, not defining it. You stop narrating your life as a problem to solve. And with that, time loosens its grip. The future still exists, but it no longer dominates. The past still has echoes, but it no longer rules. You're not racing toward, meaning you're discovering it, here, quietly, without effort. This doesn't make life easy, but it makes it honest. And honesty, unlike perfection, doesn't exhaust you. You realize something deeply freeing. You don't need to become worthy of rest. You don't need to earn your place in existence. You don't need to justify your being here. You already are, and from that place, action becomes cleaner. Choices become clearer. Desire becomes simpler. You still move. You still create. You still care. But you're no longer running from yourself. And perhaps this is the great relief we've been unconsciously seeking all along. Not transformation into someone else, but permission to finally stop trying to escape who we are. To arrive without ceremony, without applause, without improvement. Just this, breathing, aware enough. So if you feel less driven to improve yourself, less interested in becoming impressive, less convinced that you need to arrive somewhere else, pause. You may not be losing direction. You may be losing resistance, because life was never waiting for a finished version of you. It was waiting for your presence, not the perfected self, not the healed self. Just this one, breathing, aware, already here. And perhaps that's not the end of becoming, but the beginning of finally being.